Hello and welcome to Baking Nicky. In this video, I'm gonna show you how you can make your own eclairs at home. And let's start by going over the choux pastry, which is our main dough for the eclairs. And I actually have a video full of details on how you can make the perfect choux pastry. So please check that out. I have the recipe in the description box below. So we're combining butter, milk, sugar, and some salt. We bring that to a quick boil, and then we add some sifted flour. Then we're gonna take this mixture and bring it back to the stove and continue to cook for about 3 to 5 minutes until everything is nicely incorporated and you have this very thick paste. Once your dough has come together like this, then you can take it off the heat and we are ready to add one of the main ingredients for choux pastry. And this being the eggs. But before we add the eggs to this, we want to let it cool down a little bit so that it's easier to incorporate it. So I've whisked all of my eggs here and I'm only gonna add a little bit at a time and whisk vigorously until it forms a very nice and thick dough. And the eggs are such a huge part of this recipe because in combination with the flour and the protein in the flour and the liquid in the dough, this will help you get that hollow interior thanks to the expansion of gases and all that water trying to get out of the dough. So once you are done making your choux pastry, you can go on and put it in a piping bag. And that's it. This is the first step towards getting your eclairs. So now let's talk about the nozzles and the different shapes for eclairs. So you can either go for a round tip or a star tip, and I personally prefer the star tip because it adds a little something to the exterior of the shells. You get those ridges in the exterior and therefore there's more crispiness to the shells. Now, a super important thing to do is when you add your choux pastry in the piping bag, make sure that you don't get any air bubbles. And I actually have a scraper and I just go over again and again, making sure that all the dough is in one place and I have minimal air bubbles in there. Once you're happy with that, then you're ready to pipe. Now, one of the biggest issues is how do I get consistently piped eclairs? Well, I have 2 tricks for you. You can make your own eclair template like I'm showing here. And for that, you need something that will roughly give you an eclair shape, some flour, and then you just dust that with flour. You print on the baking mat and away you go. Now, the second trick that I have, which is actually one of my favorite ones because it's so convenient, is to just pipe a really long stripe all along my tray. With this method, you don't really care how long your eclair is. You will worry about that later. You only want to pipe as many strips as you possibly can on your tray. And one super important thing when it comes to piping eclairs is that you can see that I'm holding this at a 45-degree angle, and this gives you a really nice grip on the bag and also gives you an even shape as you pipe. The pressure has to be constant, so keep applying the same pressure as you move along the tray. And once you're done with that, you can pop these in the freezer because that's the secret with this method, is that you are gonna cut them. So here's my frozen batch and I'm ready to decide how long my eclair should be. So for this, you will need a ruler. And in this case, I'm gonna go for 10 centimeter eclair shells. So I'm just quickly measuring that, marking that. You can get rid of the ends of the eclair strip. I actually don't mind them, so I'm gonna use them. And there we go. You can take the leftover choux pastry and make some tiny eclairs. And look at that. That's your first eclair shell. So we will need to defrost these for about 20 minutes and then we can bake them as you would normally in a relatively low oven at 150 Celsius for about 40 to 50 minutes. And you know that your eclairs are ready once they hit that very nice golden color. They will be so nice and crispy and puffed up. So I'm gonna let them cool for a little bit and then I'm gonna transfer them to a cooling rack to completely let them cool before we get to the filling stage. Now let me give you another tip here. I normally don't use the whole batch of eclairs. What I do is actually wait for everything to cool completely and freeze the shells that I'm not gonna be using on the day. I just keep the ones that I'm not using in a resealable bag and put that in the freezer. And when I'm ready to use them again, I just take them out. You can see that they are completely frozen. They freeze quite well. And you just need to let those thaw for about 15 minutes before you bake them. You have to bake them again just to crisp them up a little bit. And this is incredible because you can have fresh eclairs anytime and nobody will be able to tell that these were actually frozen. If you put them in the oven at 180 for about 6 minutes, it's as if they were fresh all over again. So now that we've covered our baking bases, we are ready to get our other components ready. Starting with the filling. For the eclairs that I'm showing you today, I'm using a Diplomat cream, and if you haven't checked out the video from last week, I highly encourage you to do so because I'm going through all the steps in order to get the perfect custard, which will then give you the perfect Diplomat cream. And this cream is so light and delicate. We are basically making a custard by whisking some egg yolks, adding some hot milk, and then cooking this over medium heat. And by letting it all come together, bringing out those vanilla notes. We're adding some gelatin to the custard because we want to make sure that the cream doesn't completely ooze out the second you bite into the eclair. So this really helps give it some body. We add some butter for richness and we are ready to incorporate our whipped cream, which is what makes this cream so light. Once everything is completely cool, you can mix those two and get a super light and delicate cream in the end that you can pipe perfectly into shapes or the eclair filling. Now let's move on to our glaze, and for this I'm using a classic recipe for a dark chocolate glaze. I have some dark chocolate here, some whipping cream, some sugar, and a little bit of invert sugar. And don't worry, the recipe for all of these components is in the description box below, including a link to the invert sugar video that I made a few weeks back. Now, if you have glucose at home, you can also use that. What's important is not to skip this ingredient because this is what will give the glaze its overall glossy effect. And I'm just combining this. I have the cream warmed up and that will melt the chocolate and help bring everything together. You just want to stir every now and then, but let the heat do most of the work here. And as it melts, it will start to dissolve that chocolate and the sugar. Once everything comes together, you want to let this cool down to about 34 degrees Celsius, and this is the perfect pouring consistency, or in our case, dipping consistency. So now that we have all of our components, we are ready to build those eclairs. So let's start by filling those shells. And the first method, I'm just using a chopstick to drill some holes in the base of the eclair. And I like to just do 3, some people do 2, but I like to get in as much filling as possible. So once you have those holes, you can easily get a round tip to pipe your filling with. And you just do that through the hole. You stop when you feel resistance, and you can wipe off the excess with an offset spatula. Now, the second way of filling an eclair is using a very special nozzle, which is actually designed to do this kind of work. You can fill eclairs, you can fill donuts, churros, etc. So here I have some nice eclair shells, and I'm ready to just show you what that looks like first and foremost, because these are from my frozen batch. And you can see that hollow signature inside. Okay, enough of that. Let's get filling. So I'm gonna do an incision here, but you don't need the chopstick anymore. This nozzle has a very sharp end, so you can just go ahead and insert it gently. And now you want to place one hand with the eclair and one hand with the piping bag, and the one with the piping bag is doing all the work. You're applying constant pressure until you feel some resistance, and when that happens, you stop, you clear off the excess, and you are done. And I was actually a bit shocked to see that they were so heavy once you fill them, so I decided to run a little check and see how much they weigh before filling them and after filling them. So a shell was about 25 grams, and a shell with filling was about 45 to 54 grams. So that is a lot of filling, which isn't a bad thing if you ask me. So now we're ready to glaze our eclairs, and I have my glaze ready to go. It is at around 34 degrees, which is the perfect dipping temperature. So I'm going to put it in a container that kind of fits the length of my eclairs so that I can actually dunk them in. And I just dunk them, shake off the excess a little bit, and use my finger. I find that my finger works really well to just get rid of the final bit on the end there. And there you have it, the perfect glaze for a perfect eclair. You can store your eclairs in the fridge for up to 2 days, I would say, but I really recommend that you eat them on the same day. This is why I'm giving you all these tips on how you can freeze the shells so that you can enjoy them when they're nice and crispy. Now, everything that I've shown you, you can make in advance. You can make the Diplomat cream up to 2 days in advance. You can make the glaze in advance. You can use frozen shells. So it doesn't have to be a huge project, and that's what I love about this recipe. And look at that. We talked about how much filling these guys can take, and you can see that the volume is really driven by the filling. I love this cream. That's why I chose to go for something special, not just a custard. And I promise you, you're gonna love them. The shells are super tasty, the chocolate glaze is delicious, and the cream is sublime. Guys, I hope you liked this video. I hope you found lots of useful tips, and I hope you hit that subscribe button and that like button, and I will see you next week with more content.